We are live. Welcome to the Eat the Chalk podcast. No, I'm not Brian. Well, whatever Brian I usually do the podcast with. I kind of get Drake and Dwyer mixed up. I'm here, CWE as always, joined by our very own. How do you want to be introduced? Do you want to be Snoop? Do you want to be Travis? Do you want to just be like the
It doesn't
international man?
matter.
All right,
Whatever.
well,
I'll go with Snoop.
we got one of the studs of our fantasy community, Snoopaloop, Travis, Snoop, whatever he wants to go by. We could just call him the guy to the right. He's going to be helping me. He has been helping me out with the college football content on the DFS headquarters Discord. Got to keep my platform straight here. And he's definitely been doing a lot more with like the midweek max stuff because I don't play it. And it's been an absolute shit show as it is anyway with, Eastern Michigan, I believe specifically just never letting you know which one of their wide receivers are going to be playing on any given slate. So, from my perspective, it's actually a situation where I'm happy to not be as involved with that. But we got a really nice, like, post-Thanksgiving slate here. Admittedly, like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, I feel like I complain a lot. At least that's what my wife tells me. But when I saw this slate of games, I was like, wow, this is a steaming pile of dog shit. Like, to me, it just didn't feel like a ton to get excited about. It felt like there was like 3 or 4 games that you're like, okay, that's good for fantasy. And then just like, here's also 5 shitty games just so we have a full slate for you to run through. So is that kind of the takeaway you got, or are you kind of approaching this with a little more positive expectation?
It was kind of weird. I mean, you got two kind of notable games with Iowa State and then Texas played, and then you got Notre Dame and NC, and then it's kind of just a jumbled pile of crap. Like it seems like slates have been. I guess I have no idea how they pick their games. I mean, they did throw one MAC game in there, so it'll be interesting once we get to that game and talk about kind of the salary comparison that they had to some of the other games. But after digging into some of these teams, I wasn't too familiar with them, but I think we got some really good prices on guys that hopefully we can take advantage of them. And there's not a whole lot of value out there right now, but I think you can make some pretty. I know we were shooting back ideas on lineups last night, and there's some ones that can look pretty juicy, I think.
Yeah, at first glance, it almost looks like they just tried to include like every conference have a game on this slate. Like as I'm going through, there's some Mountain West teams, there's UMass and Liberty, the Big Ten, the Big 12, ACC, Pac-12, MAC. It just looks like everybody who's active in terms of the college football team conferences have something. So I guess that's cool, but like there's some of these teams and conferences that just aren't that great. And I think really this sets up hyper interestingly in terms of just a basic lineup construction. It actually kind of reminds me of last Friday's slate where you had Javion Pass and Malik Cunningham both plus, like 90. I'm trying to see. Yeah, 9,300 on Cunningham, and I think it was 10-2 on Pass. And they both sucked. I mean, they were both fucking absolutely terrible. And the build, I think the build was almost just one QB, and that was Jake Plummer from Purdue.
Yeah.
And then just a Purdue onslaught with Minnesota. If you had Rondale Moore, David Bell, Jake Plummer, Chris Autman-Bell, and Ibrahim, like that was the stack.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know if any other players actually did well. For being BJ Emmons had a touchdown at 3,400.
Yeah, that was like the second carry of the game, and then he didn't do shit. I think he went backwards all game.
Yeah, and I mean, you had like their $90,000 or $7,700 running back Malcolm Davidson, who finished with like 6 fantasy points. It was just an absolute. That whole game was just a disaster. So, to some respect, it kind of feels like that, where you have, 2 guys to me, and we'll go through these games like individually, but I did want to just kind of try to note, for comparison's sake, you have these guys in Malik Willis and Dylan Gabriel, who on the surface feel like they have the potential for 35 plus fantasy points, but it just absolutely cripples your ability to try to build anything around them. So I really don't think the combination is in play. I'm almost wondering if like there's a necessity to them in general, and we can talk about that. And this isn't like the reaction to, oh my God, Willis shit his pants against North Carolina State. Because look, at the end of the day, that was really the first test Liberty had. Virginia Tech is a half a football team. It's Hendon Hooker and then literally just guys. The defense is terrible. So, and NC State had a bad defense, but it was enough that like he didn't get off. So I don't think my perception is coming from the idea that you saw him fail, he can do it again. It's just more like what happens to your lineup if you use him, so I think that's going to be interesting as the week goes on to just try to see if we get, and we have some spots like there is value that came out today, but like it's not value that I'm like, yeah, let's play this guy. It's, well, we don't have anything else, so let's just throw another shitty line of running back into our lineup and see how that pans out. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Them two quarterbacks up top, especially Willis at 10-3. There's not a whole lot, the last couple slates we were able to get off with even a 4K guy because of some injuries. I'll be interested in what you have to say about some of the news that came out, that if we get a little more value today. But I mean, I try to dig and find that 3-5 guy every week, and I've been doing pretty good, and I just can't even find anybody that's even going to be close to that this week unless something happens. But I don't know if I have one for this late.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the cool thing here between us, because like I'm really good at judging overall matchups and figuring out like, here's this, like how do we assess Najee Harris and Breece Hall and Jamar Jefferson in the perspective of last week's slate. And I can a lot of times look at situations like that and figure out how to do it, but you really come through with like those cheap filler guys. So I feel like if you combine our two talents, eventually we should be able to win something big. Separately, we'll just continue to bubble and barely cash. But like if we can both mold it together, I think we'll hit something good. Good first game to talk about. Like if you're jumping into this slate, I mean, it's and I think like how it goes, very polarizing how it starts and finishes, because I could see both the first game in terms of like if you look at the DK screen and the last game being potential like deciding points in who wins GPPs. And this matchup probably would have had more allure earlier in the season when the assumption was Texas was going to be a little bit more of an actual force before that defense just really stopped. And, they kind of found themselves in a position where they were out of it before they even realized it. But you have a Texas team now that I don't think they played last. It feels like they've had a couple weeks off. I think they had a bye, and then I think the game against Kansas, which would have been obviously like a super high percentage Ehlinger ownership game because of how bad Kansas is. And so now you come back with Iowa State coming off a victory against Kansas State. And this is a much bigger test than Kansas State. As much as we want to look at Texas and kind of poo-poo what the season as a whole is, and really what the team as a whole is, one side of the ball can still get the job done. The other side, maybe not. So, my instinct in this is, honestly, this is a week where maybe you get Ehlinger at a little bit lower ownership than you would have before, because when you're looking at Gabriel, when you're looking at Willis, I think people see guys that have the same type of upside and easier competition that they're going up against. And maybe that makes people just kind of say, like, well, Ellinger's in a tougher matchup, and we've seen him and the offense kind of struggle. And admittedly, like, a lot of times it seems like Ellinger has 20 fantasy points and then has a 20 fantasy point fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. So do you have any varying thoughts on that, or what is your assumption on the Texas side of things?
No, I think that Ellinger, I think he will come in at lower ownership because you got Gabriel. He's only $200 more there, and I mean Ellinger, he's coming off 2 pretty subpar games. I know he threw a 50 burger in there at some point this year, but I don't know. It's Iowa State. I think they have a pretty solid against the pass, and they're over their last 4 games, they haven't allowed too much over 200 yards. Now, the thing with him is he can use his legs a little bit. The one nice thing about what I've seen by looking at Texas is we don't really have a whole lot of places to go if we want to use them. I think it's pretty much just him. They keep rotating running backs, so I'm not too interested in any of them. And over the last couple of games, they've been using between Moore, Smith, and Eagles. It's kind of just flip a coin on that one. The one interesting thing that it would be if Whittington comes back. Did you see anything about him coming back? I know he's been a while with that hip flexor strain, and how the injury news is, and I'm not really sure if we're going to get anything on there.
Yeah, I think I follow someone on Twitter. I think it's College Fantasy Football or something. I don't know. And he's usually really good about posting stuff that beat reporters are like saying, like, so and so is active in practices. He's suited up. He's running with the first string. So, yeah, the biggest question with things like that just kind of become: does it make Whittington a good player? Does it make all of the other plays less viable? And look, I mean, all these guys out, even more really for some of the upside that we've seen, are all relatively cheap. $6K for Moore. At points this year, he's been an $8K like receiver. I think that has diminished, with Jake Smith kind of coming back into action, who himself is only, 5,100, which is a really good price. Brendan Eagles at 42, Whittington at 41. There's a lot of options. I don't know that any of these guys like fall into the cash category, but here's the problem. If you're spending up at quarterback, I just don't see a way that you're not putting guys in your lineup in this range. And we did lose a running back who was one of the more expensive, but not the high-end expensive running backs. So it really kind of messes up what I think would have been a chalkier cash build. I'm a big fan of Ellinger this week. You look back through those Iowa State games, and a lot of the teams that they were facing are like Kansas State just has not looked good. Kansas, no comment. Baylor struggled to really get anything going this year, even though in that game they were able to put it together. Oklahoma State, they haven't really been that good either. Chuba Hubbard made a horrible decision in coming back to college. He should have definitely just declared for the draft because he has been awful this season. So, like, that's where the just looking at statistics can tell a story that might not be true. So in tournaments, yes, I think Ellinger makes a great pivot spot. And we'll talk about, especially with Gabriel, we'll talk about where I can see there being some flaws in approaching Gabriel this week at that kind of price. Running back, it's just, if Keontae Ingram remains out, I have some interest in Bijan Robinson. He looked good against a pretty good West Virginia defense. He offers you a little bit of salary savings at the position. I just don't think he hasn't played enough games to say, like, doesn't offer upside, because look, he houses 2 50-yard touchdowns and you look like an asshole for saying the guy's doesn't have upside. And stuff like that happens. in pro football. Hello, you play 35% Miles Sanders and Boston Scott houses a 49-yard touchdown catch. So the stuff happens all the time, especially in college where there's many more plays being run against far worse defenses. So I think there's a little bit of interest there. I'm probably more in tournaments, but this is a game of interest. And on the Iowa State side of the ball, look, it's decision time. Last week, I definitely didn't play any Breece Hall. He was like 9,900. He didn't fit. I thought Jamar Jefferson was an equal or better play, almost to the dollar and or almost to the points. I think they were like equal. So saving that $1,000 to get to Jefferson last week was a super smart play. And I kind of am in the same basket again with Breece Hall again this week. I hate playing the fade a guy who's getting a bunch of touches, who's been hyper efficient, who scores touchdowns, who they want to be involved, who they feature. It's a team that wants to run more than anything else. But Texas defense has been a legitimate chainsaw against the running game. And so with a quarterback, and you almost wonder, like, was a lot of that game planning where you saw more passing when they didn't need to against Kansas State last week? Was it kind of a warm up because they knew this is what you have to do to beat this Texas team? Hey, we have a lame duck team here in Kansas State. Let's test everything out on them, work out all the kinks so that next week we can really feature, Brock Purdy, who's just dirt cheap with really similar upside, maybe not to Ellinger, but he's got 35-point upside. I mean, go back last year, the year before, he's had games where he's put up rushing stats, where he's put up passing stats. And if this game stays close and it can't be a Breece Hall game and the focus is more on, Brock Purdy at 6,300, I mean, it's risky. It makes your stomach churn a little bit, but I see a path for him just absolutely breaking this slate.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do like him for what his price is. I mean, you're not going to find too many of these quarterbacks that are priced like this, and kind of there's your high end this week, and there's not really a whole lot in the middle, and then there's actually decent options in the 6 range. And the one thing I like about Purdy is he's got a pretty narrow target tree that he's going to. I mean, Xavier Hutchinson at 5.9, I think he might just eat this team apart. I mean, he's even seven targets a game. I think that's probably, one of the cash almost locks of the week when he's seeing that much and this game total. Because really the only other guy they use is the tight end Charlie Kolar, and he's pretty touchdown dependent. I mean, you're going to get 2 to 4 catches a week, and he caught a touchdown last week, and that worked out. But you're also banking on a touchdown on that at 4.5. I don't mind a shot in tournaments, but I think Hutchinson's price is awesome at 5.9.
Yeah, I think it was a funny conundrum for both of us last week because we were both on the Jordan Addison train, and I had enough. And I was looking at, do I come off of Jefferson? Because the only 2 people I had left were Jamar Jefferson and Addison, and I'm just kind of sitting there and looking at my lineup, and I had, running back from Arkansas who just poo-pooed in his pants and just, really in his defense, he had one of those games where he could have easily had like 25 fantasy points if things would have just clicked. And one time he dropped a pass that would have been probably a 30-yard gainer. One time, clear shot into the end zone. Franks could have hit him and he would have had, a 10-yard catch. But I was doing okay. I had WAP, Philor. It's so crazy. That was like 3 days ago. I don't even remember who else was in my lineup other than that. But I mean, I felt like I was okay enough. And then I was like, you love Jefferson. You do this shit to yourself all the time. Stick with the guy you like. And like, I just had enough to get up to Hutchinson, and he put together just a massive game that really, and you went to Kolar, and I don't think that necessarily killed you, but I do think something I have concern about with Kolar, they've been running more and more like tight ends out there. And he's 89 or 88. I don't know, whatever. I always have like one or two lineups with him, and it always seems like it's a lineup I need him to do really well in, and I could win something, and it's the other tight end that catches a touchdown pass. And I'm just like, for because it wasn't like that last year, or at least the appearances weren't there. I think both of these guys really at their prices. I definitely, even it's a $1,400 difference between the two, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Hutchinson's definitely that guy that you're looking at in cash. I think Kolar makes a tournament, viable play. What is your take on Breece Hall? Is it one of those things? I'm literally sitting here. I want to say things like, if I play like 40 lineups, 40-ish, 20, somewhere between 20, 40 lineups, I'm literally saying I don't know if I'm going to play Breece Hall. But then I start thinking to myself, like, he's active enough in the passing game that he could, end up with 2 receiving touchdowns. And even if he doesn't have great, rushing production, he could still get there. So any thoughts on him?
I mean, I usually run 3 lineups. As of right now, I don't see playing him. It might change a little bit we lost a running back that I kind of liked in the 7K range. So as of right now, I don't think that I would have him. I might do 1 of 3. I mean, he's getting 20 plus carries a game. He is one of the he's one of the college workhorses, and you've seen some of the games that he can just explode for. I mean, he's one of the best running backs in college, so I mean, he has 40-point upside if he breaks off some of those huge games. And it's not like Texas is a good run defense, but I don't think they went against anybody like Hall this year. I mean, it's just he has the upside to break the slate, and I don't think he's going to be too highly owned.
No, I don't either. For what it's worth, they have played Letty Brown. They have played Chuba Hubbard. So they've played some guys who are, look, he's been the best running back in college up to this point. I would have thought ETN would have been, but really it's hard to look at Breece Hall just because ETN gets like 14 carries, but like Breece is getting all the work. So you're right. I mean, this is a situation where I don't think you just completely fade him. If I'm running 20 teams, I should be smart and at least play him on like 5 just in case he does have, maybe 2 with Purdy, 3 without. That way, if he does have like a good chemistry with Purdy, I'm covered. And if he doesn't, and it just becomes a Breece Hall show in Texas, this is just a one back that Texas can't stop. You're covered there too. Now we get to talk about 3 games that basically just aren't fun. But we'll go through them anyway. Moving on to UMass and Liberty. Big $1 million question here. And I know my answer to this. Are you even considering anyone from UMass?
No. They are a bad team, and I kind of watched a little bit of that game last week just because I think it was the last one that was on, and it's understandable that they're terrible because the 59 of the people on the roster are either true freshmen or redshirt freshmen. So now you put them against a Liberty team, which is now 8-1, and I don't know. And yeah, because they wanted to run the table and try to you go undefeated, and then you get into that conversation, even though they are Liberty, of having a spot in the college football playoff because you haven't lost anybody yet.
And even maybe outside of that, it's also a situation where, look, I don't think Liberty was in that discussion, whatever, but they could have been in the discussion for, the New Year's Six Bowl, which brings a lot of attention and money into the program. And that's not happening now with 2 undefeated teams with Cincinnati and BYU. So like their shot is they're always going to be able to look back and say 2020 was a banner year and like, man, look at us go. But it's a loss in terms of their hopes for something really big. And I agree with you. I watched a little bit of that Massachusetts game as the Purdue game winded down, and man, that was just – it was tough to watch both sides. I mean, you're watching an FAU team that should have buzzsawed them, and they were like limp dick struggling, running for 2 yards. Like, what is going on here? So I'm with you. No love for Liberty or no love for UMass. And then you go to the Liberty side of the ball, and you have to do like a little bit of a double take. It's one of these situations where you're like, this is a great spot. And then you're like, I could play Malik Willis, but can I play any other player that plays for Liberty?
Yeah, and and just by looking at it, them receivers, there's nobody that really is going to get over 4 targets a game. And I think that for how much volume they're going to get, I think they're all overpriced. And as far as the running backs, they don't really have any running backs that you want to target. I think it's pretty much on this game. If I'm going to take anybody, it's Willis, and I'm not even stacking him with somebody because he's had a couple 100-yard rushing games this year, and he does it. He's basically their whole team. I mean, he's got 3 games over 40 points this year. I don't think there's a need to stack him when you look at some of his receiver prices. Even if they do catch 4 balls for a touchdown, you can get another guy in that 6K range that has a ton more upside than them. And Willis isn't a cash game play anyway, so in tournaments, I'm fine with just running him out there naked and trying to hit a home run with somebody else in that price.
I do think due to the lack of value, there is some merit into playing Willis, because I'm gathering from a couple of the different like groups that I have access to on Discord that discuss college football. There seems to be a lot of people who are kind of just of the opinion that, like, he's expensive. There's no value. There's really not, like, you don't see the value where you're like, oh yeah, I could see 25 points out of that guy at 5K. So like, I do think Willis is going to be one of those guys. Noah Frith was someone who was 3,400 last week, and because he went 473-1, apparently deserved like a 3K price bump. You're not spending that. I mean, and this is a game where if Willis has been running all year, this is not a situation where he's going to be like, this time I'm just going to start chucking the ball. So I really don't see it. I think Willis is fringe cash game playable just because, man, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of power.
But it's one of those things where, like, this is a prime bounce back spot where he puts up 45 points. But if he doesn't, but then you start looking through against teams like this, he's had like 47, 55, 43, and you're like, all right, the teams that he's played that have been absolute dog shit, he's absolutely demolished. But man, it's just one of those things where I admittedly, my first build was 2 6K quarterbacks, and build up from there and just kind of see what I can get. I really haven't tried let's see what happens when I will say this, I have a feeling if you do the Willis quarterback build, you're stuck with a 1 quarterback build. I don't think you are doing a 2 quarterback build, or else you're spending 16.5 on your quarterback position out of what, a $55,000 salary? I mean, for $5,000, $50,000 salary. I'm just trying to do it real quick just to see like what happens if I stick him and Purdy in there. You have 5,500 left per position on a slate where there's just not a ton of value. So
yeah, you're gonna have to hope that them volume running backs just do absolutely nothing, and your two quarterbacks, you need 80 points from them guys at least then.
All right, moving on. We got Big Ten showdown, Nebraska at Iowa. Nebraska, 17-point favorite last week, 37 team total. Just absolutely had their asshole ripped out from underneath them. It was an absolute demolishing by what we don't believe is a very good, like, Illinois team. And now they're facing a team that is #good plus just year in and year out one of the best defensive teams in the Big Ten and one of the slowest paced teams in college football. So, I mean, right now, last time I looked, Vegas total on this was 51.5, minus 14 in favor of Iowa, 32 and 18 point totals. Man, I love what Luke McCaffrey brings to the game, but man, he sees a price jump. I will say this, these running quarterbacks, these quarterbacks who can do this, I'll take some shots on McCaffrey naked in tournaments just because in the event that somehow he has like 130-yard, 3-touchdown game, I mean, he could potentially be one of the top 2 scoring quarterbacks on the slate. I don't think that stat line is going to get you to the number 1 spot. What's the math on that? Like 28, 31, 30. Let's say he's at 35, 36 with passing stats. But it's an interesting proposition. Otherwise, I can't look at this roster and see anything else that's viable.
No, I mean, and McCaffrey, he's struggled in the passing game. I mean, he's got 1 touchdown to 5 interceptions. Robinson got hurt at the end of the game last week, so you don't even know if he's going to be playing this week.
Let's be quite honest. I hate to interrupt you, but I do it to everyone all the time. Yeah, we don't even know if McCaffrey's actually going to start. Like, he was replaced at the end of the game. My assumption is that he would be, but like, I watched this because I played him in cash. It worked out okay. All right? It was okay. It wasn't great. It worked out okay. This kid's legit fucking terrible when he's throwing the football. I mean, he has no depth perception, and even on easy throws, he's fluttering footballs into the air, and like you or I could have, daintily danced from 30 yards away and picked this fool off trying to hit his tight end. So for me, it's just a tough pill to swallow. One of my rules in DFS is I just don't play people against Iowa.
Yep. Yeah, and it's going to be a slow-paced game, and then I guess that leads us to the Iowa side, and the only 2 plays I see from that is their 2 running backs, and Goodson and Sargent. I mean, I think that Goodson is terribly underpriced on this at 6.4K.
He might be the highest player on the slate.
Yeah, I don't get that pricing. I mean, I think he's at least 1K too cheap. So,
and I think you also see a tremendous amount of Goodson, Sargent stacks after watching Epstein and Brown do what they did. I think a lot of people will think they're being sneaky and doing the 2 running back from the same team stack. So,
I mean, you're guaranteeing 35 to 40 touches at that, and it's barely, what are you at, roughly 11K for that? I mean, 11K for 35, 40 touches from the running backs. I could see that.
Yeah, one thing I did make a note of, and I have to go through and look again to be sure, but it seems like Nebraska's just been getting waxed by tight ends too. And in a game where, we're looking for some kind of value, he has done absolutely nothing this year of relevancy, like the Hawkinson Fant days of old, the Kittle days are not there right now. But Sam Laporta is 3,600.
Yeah.
At that price, like 3 for 40 and a touchdown could make him game, where you got to get that glue in to get a bunch of guys to work around him. So he's someone that I'm monitoring. But you get a lot of these guys. Smith Marset is cheap again. He hasn't really done much of anything because guess what? They don't pass the ball. But if in some situation like, I've always viewed Iowa as being a smart team, and it wouldn't shock me if they're like, yeah, these guys are getting killed by tight ends. Let's use Laporta to set things up, and maybe we get a bigger game. But man, just not a good game overall in terms of like who's in the player pool.
Yeah, Laporta at 3.6. I mean, he's had 2 games over 7 targets this year, so he's probably, I like him better than what I think their number 1 receiver is 4.6 or something.
Brandon Smith, yeah. And honestly, no one's going to play Laporta. I mean, no. I don't care how cheap he is. He hasn't put up the numbers that are going to make people feel comfortable. A lot of people don't care how many targets somebody gets.
Yep.
All people care about is how many points did they get. If they're getting, you look and you see it's like 6.7 points on average. Why am I playing a guy that's getting less than 7 points? I'm not. I want to play guys and they don't conceptualize it like, okay, well, what happens? Just God forbid he gets 7 targets and he catches 5 and goes 5 for 60 and 2.
Yeah.
These are not things that are outside of the realm of possibility. And I think he's I don't want to say my favorite tournament play, but he's up there because he's cheap, and I think there is some upside in the matchup.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that you said. I mean, these guys they have shitty quarterbacks thrown to them, so maybe if they don't throw it into their feet 4 times, actually hit them in the chest, then them 7 target 2 catch games turn into 6 and 7, and you're sitting good there at 3.6. So I don't think you're going to find another person at 3.6 on this slate that is going to do a whole lot.
Yeah, that might be my solid 50% ownership play, and if it's just a hill I die on, because like we said, I mean, you look through, and look, we talked about it in NFL last week too, and it didn't perfectly ended up working out for you because if you would have had pretty much the nuts for a low scoring slate had you run one variation of the lineup that you had at some point. But we were talking about it and looking at, do we want to play Kalen Ballage? I know the coach said he's going to be the lead back, but when you could, even though the pricing is completely different, why not just spend on Derrick Henry, who is going to get the touches? Mm-hmm. So there becomes this mentality that I don't want to, if I'm punting, I don't want to punt at running back, mm-hmm. right? Unless everyone else on the team is not touching the ball and you're getting a guy at 4K who's going to touch the ball 20 times, because there are guys who are going to touch the ball. You've got Breece Hall on this slate. You have Goodson. You have Xavier Holiday. You've got all of these guys who are going to touch the ball many, 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 many times. You don't need to be punting with a running back. I'd rather punt Sam Laporta at 3.6. And if he comes through, great. And if not, it didn't fuck me up as bad as if I picked a bad running back. So that's kind of my take there. Moving on, we're now going to UFC against USF. Terrible team on one side of the ball, loses their best player because he's an asshole. And he kicked off the team for what appears to be the second time in back-to-back years. Always fun times. Uber talented. He was good when he was on the field. So, all right. Dylan Gabriel. I feel like this is the chalk bomb. And it's weird because at first when I went through everything, I was like, this is such an obvious spot for Gabriel. South Florida's terrible against the pass, but look, at the end of the day, South Florida's fucking terrible against everything. They're a bad football team on both sides of the ball. Gabriel's 9,200. You start going through the box score, and you kind of feel like the game is probably going to be need to be a little bit closer at this juncture of the year for Gabriel to have one of those near ceiling games. And his floor is under 30 points. It's 27 to 28. Not terrible. I don't think you're looking at a Tom Brady floor where it's 17 fantasy points. That's not him. It's not trying to go in on Tom Brady. That's one of the reasons I didn't play him and I had huge success in Showdown yesterday, was just because it didn't feel like a matchup that was going to be suited to the strengths of Tom Brady. But I kind of feel that way when you have a guy like Purdy, who I think is in a position where he can compete with Gabriel's floor. I don't want to spend 9. I don't feel comfortable. When it was Memphis, it was this could be a close game, and Memphis is susceptible through the air. That's clearly how they're going to attack them. But I could see Gabriel coming out and tossing for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and at his price, that's not enough.
No.
Am I crazy? Am I over analyzing this? Because I do have the tendency to do that.
No, I mean, he's only had 2 ceiling games this year. I guess the one thing that I do like about him is he's got about 35 pass attempts a game. So, he's going to be chucking it out there. The bad thing is that USF is so bad against everything. UCF runs out 3 different running backs, and what if each one of them score? I mean, then you're really cutting down his upside, because unless he throws it to one of them, I don't know. I really liked him when I started looking at this too, but then you're looking at it, and if you want to play Gabriel, I almost wanted to stack him with Marlon Williams, and then he's 8.
Then you have no money left.
Then you have no money left. So
Yeah.
I always hate paying up for that huge receiver or the huge quarterback that has a high-priced receiver, and there's no value on the slate. Like, I'm not going to stack Gabriel with two of the lower-priced ones and then leave. Hopefully, Marlon Williams doesn't do anything, because then you're hoping for two things that happen: one, that he goes off, and that one, that he doesn't go off with Marlon Williams.
Yeah, and I'm definitely telling you, no questions asked. Playing the I hope Marlon Williams doesn't go off game is one you're going to lose more often than you're going to win. I mean, RotoWire finally updated like all of their targets from this weekend. UCF, as I mentioned to you yesterday, was one I was waiting for. And you just look across Marlon Williams, and it's like 12, 13, 18, 17, 16, 15, 13, 12. That's what you want to fade? Yeah. Like, and they're high-value targets. They're not Deontay Johnson 2.5, ADOT targets where, Deontay Johnson is the Pittsburgh Steelers' number one running back, basically, with the distance he's getting passes from Big Ben. But, like, these are very high-value touches. So I think I'm more likely to play Robinson without Gabriel, because there's a more likely chance. I just see this, and even his ceiling, I think Williams is an interesting guy, because Gabriel could throw 3 touchdowns and all of them go to Marlon Williams. Like, there's no guarantee, but there's more of a chance that happens with this specific receiver on this slate than any other team. So I'm much more willing to invest into Marlon Williams than I am Dillon Gabriel. I don't think it's a bad play. I don't even know if that's where people are going to go in cash. I just don't think they're going to go with Willis. I'm pretty confident on that. I think it could be Gabriel because he's consistent. I think he brings a safe floor. It's tough. It's a tough thing trying to play these games where you're like, well, the running backs could run them in, or he could throw to them. Like, it's really tough to say that. But man, with a defense like this, like, literally anything can happen. Running backs. What about defensive touchdowns? Like, holy shit! Like, Boise State just had a game a couple weeks ago where they put up like 50 points, and their quarterback had 10 fantasy points because there were like 4 special teams touchdowns. So there's a lot of concern with stuff like that there. I'm in. I think you could play specifically like McCray and Otis Anderson in tournaments. I don't know that they're like cash viable. Maybe Otis Anderson at 4 point. I take that back. I think in a matchup like this, one of them could be viable, right? 5.3 and 4.9. I don't think there's a ceiling is the problem, right? I think they rotate them in enough, and Gabriel is going to throw some touchdowns. And I think more often than not, they're unlikely to be to the running backs. So it's just one of those things where, like, I guess if you feel like you need like a 12 to 14 point floor, I think one of the running backs can do it at that price. Jalen Robinson, good, fast, can get downfield. Wouldn't shock me if he went, for 100 and a touchdown. Same could be said about Trey Nixon working his way back, as long as there's no, there's no, re-aggravation of injury. And unfortunately, this is a little bit later of a game, so we won't know at jump. But I think he's in the tournament pool. Then we go over to the USF side of things. And, what I was alluding to is Johnny Ford. He's been dismissed. So that leaves Brian Batty and Kelly Joyner as, potential fill-ins. Man, neither of these guys are like overly exciting in this matchup, but one's 4.6 and one's 3.5. I feel like there's people out there that are going to say that, like, this is a good source of salary relief. Again, I'd rather play Sam Laporte at 3.6 and not waste one of these spots on a guy in a negative game script. Worth noting that it did seem like Batty was the one who was more involved against the University of Houston, which is a much more favorable matchup than I think what they're going to – maybe not much more, but I think it's – even if it's even, 86 yards on 13 carries, 2 receptions for 27, 13 points. I mean, 4.6, it's not the end of the world, but it's more about what you're taking up. You're taking up either a running back spot or you are taking up a flex spot. And either way, I just think that's an opportunity cost that I would rather not undertake. And then to me, there's none of these. This is Massachusetts level unplayable at the receiver position.
Yeah, I had nothing there, and even as far as that 4.6 running back, I mean, you're definitely not. I don't care really what tournament you're playing in. He's probably not going to be your second running back, so he's going to be in your flex spot. Then I would just rather go to Laporta, like you said, and save your $1,000 and upgrade at one other position.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to preface, like, if you add a touchdown to what he did, somehow he, ends up getting the. Now we're talking he's near 20 points, and it becomes a much different conversation. So I don't hate it, but on a team, like, let me look at what their expectation is here. They've got. I mean, it's a 21 point total. I have not looked since like they kicked Johnny Ford off the team. I can't imagine he's going to swing it more than a point.
I still have 20.
Yeah, 21 points is not that's enough. I mean,
yeah, somebody has to score.
Somebody has to score. So I don't know. I'm going to have to think on that a little bit further. I don't see myself playing him in cash games. But again, in tournaments, a 4.6 running, but he's in a timeshare. So I think he's a tournament differentiator only. Yeah. Now we'll get to another juicy game. Notre Dame against UNC. And Snoop, man, damn, UNC just knows how to get into these slugfests. And this Notre Dame team is a tough offense, tough defense, but started to kind of see some, holes in the armor, so to speak, where they had a closer game with Georgia Tech, I believe, or no, Boston College.
Yep.
And then even the last team that they played, I'm just saying, like, they've been giving up more points than they have been. And this is definitely one of those games that jumps off the page to me as being, one that people might stay away from because of how good Notre Dame has appeared. But you get some attractive pricing on a lot of these UNC guys. You get even more attractive pricing on the Notre Dame guys, especially at the wide receiver position, and even Ian Book himself in comparison to, a lot of the other quarterbacks on the slate. I don't know. Just going through this, I was making notes, and this was the first game that I was really like, yeah, I like this. I think this could be something that could really, and my research tends to indicate, and this is kind of funny, that it is not likely to be done through the running game. It seems like Notre Dame is probably a little bit more susceptible through the air. A lot of that probably because teams are playing from behind, trying to play catch up. I could see that being the situation here. At the same time, I think this UNC team is good enough to kind of be annoying and hang around and actually push Notre Dame to have a ceiling game. And we haven't had to really see that out of Kyren Williams and Ian Book and some of these other guys. So what are your thoughts here on the Notre Dame side of things?
Yeah, I mean, you're thinking that everybody's kind of thinking that Notre Dame has a pretty strong defense, but I mean, look at over the last two games, they gave up 31 and 40 points. So, it's not like they can't be scored on. And that was going against who they had, Boston College and Clemson. And that was
again, if you look through who they've played a lot of shitty football teams.
Yeah. And now you have a team that has in North Carolina that has no interest in playing any defense and just wants to get in shootouts, like because they played Wake last week, and that game almost had to get to 100 points. And as far as the pricing, Notre Dame, I think, is severely mispriced on this slate. You compare them to even North Carolina, and the prices aren't even close. I mean, I don't get Ian Book's salary at 7.3. I mean, you have Luke McCaffrey $100 more than him, and Book has a huge, they probably have the same floor, but I think his ceiling is much higher. Last week, I think, what do you have, three? Do you have three rushing touchdowns? Or he had three passing and one rushing. So you got four. He had four touchdowns last week, and you're at 7.3 there. And UNC, they give up yards through the ground and through the air. I mean,
they give up everything. I mean, yeah. It's like, you're right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. This is just a team that wants to play fast football, wants to score points, and it almost seems like they just want their offense on the field as much as possible, even if that means the defense being on a very short time while they're giving up points.
And, you know, kind of how the difference how I kind of play college compared to NFL. NFL, I always want, you know, in tournaments, I go my quarterback and two pass catchers. Now, college, usually you have the one kind of alpha receiver where you just go 1-and-1 and stack them. Now, you have his two receivers that are 5.3 and 4.3. I mean, you're getting a lot of targets there at not too much money. So
no,
I don't know how many people are actually going to stack both receivers with them. And, you know, Kyren Williams left last week's game with an injury. I know Kelly said that he didn't re-enter the game precautionary, but that could be another, you know, they gave it to Sibo Flemister when he went out, but I don't know, you might, if he doesn't play, you could see a lot more through the air against a team that's susceptible.
Yeah, I really love this game, and like you said, I mean, we saw the path last week or 2 weeks ago. UNC was a bye week last week. Now that I think about it, because I didn't have to decide which one of the running backs I had to ultimately choose incorrectly. Though, admittedly, the last few weeks I've been on point with which one was the right play because it's both. Yeah, I think, you know, no one, and when we say no one, we're talking in like the scheme of things. Is you're right. We've been trained in the NFL that you win GPPs by playing quarterback, two of the receiving options, and one bring back. But in college, it could easily be Spencer Sanders and just Tylan Wallace because he gets 70% of the targets. I don't see that being the case. I think you have an interesting dynamic here where Skronek seems to be more of like the touchdown guy, which highly variant, so a little bit scary. But he's cheap, so he doesn't need 3 touchdowns. He could get by with 2 touchdowns. And again, what we're not putting into perspective here is they haven't played a team like North Carolina who's just like, sure, go out there, score. You know, and if North Carolina gets in the lead, that's not going to allow Notre Dame to, you know, like establish the run and play how they want to play. So I love this on the UNC side of things. I mean, you know, we saw Sam Howell absolutely break the slate. You know, and admittedly, I think I had 2 lineups with Howell that day, and he was somewhat chalky. So that was obviously not a very good day for me. But you see the upside that's there. You can't expect 6 touchdowns, but he's starting to turn things on. Man, when I came into this year, I remember the first week of the season, it was like, no questions asked, this is the fucking guy in my cash games, and they just ran and ran and ran and ran and ran. And I'm like, and for the first month, there was no more disappointing player in college football than Sam Howell. That this is starting to turn. You know, you're starting to see these 27-28, obviously the 56-point game. Man, 8,700 for a guy who has the highest upside on the slate at the position, period, because nobody else has scored as many points as he has. So this guy has the highest upside on the slate. It doesn't matter what anyone says. The highest upside belongs to the guy who has scored the most points at the position. No argument there. So this is a really good play. You know, Michael Carter at 67 is up there enough now that it's a consideration. In, you know, like, look, when he was like 5,900, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm just playing him. 6,700 makes you think enough because Javonte Williams is clearly someone who in the NFL should just be a fucking bulldozer, right? This kid is just yak all the way. Once he gets the ball in his hands, it's like Derrick Henry light. It almost seems like. I just don't feel like this is a great matchup for him. But again, like we said with Breece Hall, he's active enough in the receiving game that he could end up with some of these receiving touchdowns. Dyami Brown at 7,200 does feel a little bit overpriced, but I think you have to look past that because if he scores another 30 plus fantasy points, all of a sudden he's not too expensive.
Yeah.
And then you finally see Daz Newsome starting to look like himself. He's had back-to-back games. We're hearing reports that, he was dealing with an early season injury that may be behind him. Still feels a little bit tough to trust him. Don't know that I'm necessarily going there in cash games. We'll see. As much as we're talking up this game, you kind of feel like you probably need someone from it in cash, right?
I'm thinking so. Yeah. And I think I'm more on the Notre Dame side of the ball in cash games just because, Newsome at 5.7, 1.4 increase from last time he came out. Brown's a little much for me to pay for a receiver in cash.
Mm-hmm.
And the two running backs, I've been playing Michael Carter a ton. He's actually seeing almost more work than Williams. Maybe not as much in the passing game, but they're at a pretty much even split. So for the price discount, I don't know if I prefer Carter in this game. They don't have a good matchup. So I think I would just rather go to the receiving side. I don't really know how much they're going to be able to do on the ground in this game. I think them guys are definitely more on the tournament side.
Yeah, and this is a very easy game to stack up, not only from knowing where the production is coming from, but also the prices. And it's specifically because of all of the Notre Dame guys being underpriced. It really makes it easy. So, all right, next up, we kind of have a little bit of a dud. CMU, EMU, sick to my stomach with the Eastern Michigan situation. Man, I got to be honest, after talking about the game we just talked about, I'm like, I don't want to talk about this game. But in reality, it's only 5 point less of an expected total. It is a 6 point spread, so it's a little more than we saw with the 3.5 point spread. And the game we just talked about actually has the second highest total. The first highest belongs to UCF and USF. Man, I don't know. Admittedly, this is an area where I think you're going to be talking about more than I am. It seems like I'm just trying to check real quick here. It seems like there could be some consolidated production on both of these teams. For Central Michigan, it looks like on the surface, it's Kobe Lewis and Khalil Pimpleton. On the Eastern Michigan side of things, it looks like it is more Badoon, maybe Tyler New, I think is his name. Quinnen Williams caught my eye, but talk to me a little bit about Central Michigan here.
For Central Michigan, let's see here. Pimpleton, he had last game he had three catches for 42 yards and 3 touchdowns. Before that, his production really wasn't that great. And at 7.5, I think he's extremely overpriced on this.
In my model, he's potentially the worst point per dollar play on the entire slate.
Yeah, I can't see myself getting there. The only other receiver that I would maybe have interest in from Central Michigan is Dallas Dixon. He's getting targets. He's 4.4, but that's about all there. Kobe Lewis, that price point is kind of hard, 7.4, but he has been getting the work. His last two, he hasn't got as many carries as in the first game. First game, he had an awesome game. He had 35 points, 28 carries. And Eastern Michigan is pretty susceptible to giving up yards on the ground. So I can see Kobe Lewis as a pretty good tournament play. As far as quarterback, Daniel Richardson, I don't know. They were running some weird Wildcat almost. I think that's why Pimpleton had a lot of his production is because they were running Wildcat half the game, and Hutchinson wasn't even on the field. So for Central Michigan, Kobe Lewis, maybe Dixon as a cheap flyer. And over to the Eastern Michigan side, Hutchinson is 8.6, and I think that is way overpriced. I don't know if they jacked up these prices a little more just because they had them Tuesday and Wednesday max late, so everybody's kind of used to the names. But I cannot see paying 8.6 for Hutchinson at all. Going through the running backs, they're full on split three-way committee. I have no interest in any of them. For the receivers, Badun, I think, is a little underpriced at 5.4. Just watching those games, you can tell he is easily their best receiver out on the field. And he's gotten 13 and 11 catches or targets in the games that he's played. Not really sure still why he sat out that second game. There was no really injury news, but I mean, he came back for 8 catches and 64 yards last game. I mean, he's more of a possession receiver, and that took away from a lot of the stuff that Tanner Kuhn did. He had a huge game when Badun was out, but they both play the same position. So he was only in on 2 targets last game, and the first game he only had 6 targets. So Quinn Williams is probably the other guy. And for some reason, he got 1 target in their second game. Last week, he had 10 targets, 8 catches. So that's going to be more of a flyer. 4,900. I think you can find other guys that have a safer floor. And I'm not really sure that his ceiling is way higher because he is the second target on that team.
Yeah, I think coming into the year, Quinn Williams was – I think he was the guy people expected to be that receiver for the team. Yeah. So in situations like that, you always are sensitive to the progression of the season and how things can change, but always kind of remember, especially in a season like this, that it could take time for things like that to develop. So I think Badun sounds like he could be a guy that would make sense in cash game lineups. At his price, you said it was 5.4. Like that's silly. 8 for 86. You don't even need a touchdown. And if you get there, then you're more than happy with that production.
Yeah, I think that he's definitely in the cash pool consideration. I mean, even, his first game, he had 9 for 112. So, he's getting peppered with targets out there. And you can see Hutchinson is looking towards him just about every time he drops back.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I have a little bit of a soft spot here for Hutchinson, too, because – man, he's not going to get played. People are going to look at that price and go, ha, 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 ha. This dude had like a 100-yard, 3-touchdown rushing game this season, and I'm not calling for him to replicate that, but you start looking at what a guy's potential upside is, and, I mean, that's a nice bit of up. So he's not a cash game play, but in tournaments, I feel like there's enough upside there with him, and I think it's an easy stack with Badun because you don't need Badun to score a touchdown to really get you. I mean, it'd be great, but I mean, I think there's a scenario where you can take the stat line that Williams had last week without the touchdown and say, okay, Badun has 10 for 122, and he's got 25 fantasy points without breaking a sweat, and Hutchinson ends up taking 3 and again and has 38 fantasy points, and that combination wins all the money without them actually connecting for a score. I think on Kobe Lewis, he was another one who I happened to turn the game on at one point and see him in the Wildcat around the goal line too. I was really like, when I saw that, because I believe in his talent, I believe he's a very, very, very good player. I think it comes down to the discussion we just had like a couple of games ago where do you want the guy who is getting the touches, a lot of the touches, or do you want this guy? And I don't think it's necessarily like a split situation. Maybe they're just, I don't know. Like, I believe I looked through it and I was like, this Nichols guy, he had 6 for 19 the game before. He got lucky. The game was a blowout. He had 12 carries plus 2 touchdowns, 1 through the air. Also worth noting that Kobe Lewis had 5 catches in the first game. He didn't have any the last 2 games. So, like, it feels like, here's the situation I feel like with Kobe Lewis. It feels like he's touchdown dependent, okay? But it also feels like that this team just in the snap of a finger could completely change what they want to do. And he has 28 touches again this week. And you're like, the fuck did I not play this guy for? Because I thought he was touchdown variant. I don't know. One thing I think, I haven't mentioned, but in college, in the NFL, what I think would be a huge value add for us to do, and it's kind of like giving secrets away on air, but we need to like start compiling a document about the coaches and their tendencies. If a team is playing a team and it's clear that they like are susceptible to the run, a word that we've used 718 times already on this podcast, but if we know that the team can be had on the ground and the coach is typically a pass first offense, does a coach just continue to do what he does, or does the coach say, no, I'm going to play to their weakness and I'm going to run the ball more? And I think that's a tremendous asset to have if you could look back and be like, okay, in all of the games where it was very clearly a running game script, even though they like to pass, they ran the football. It's nothing that's going to help us this week, but it's something to keep in mind. If this coach is one of the more flexible types who is going to be like, yes, we're going to run because that seems to be where the deficiency is, that's a powerful piece of information to have, because then moving forward, we could kind of know how to prioritize who we are playing from these games. All right, next up, let's go to Wyoming against UNLV. Don't have a lot on these teams. They haven't played like a ton this year, but like the most immediate standout play to me, my model actually has Xavier Holiday a full 9 points higher than any other running back. And that includes Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, Kyron Williams. I mean, he is, as far as my model goes, like the absolute cream of the crop. I have him for 132 rushing yards, 1.2 touchdowns, 4 receptions, 63 receiving yards, and a half a touchdown. So projection system really, really, really seems to like him a lot this week.
That almost seems low.
No. Oh, he definitely could be for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's almost, you would almost say that's one of your cash must plays. I mean, he's getting 27 carries per game this year, and UNLV in their couple games, they've been absolutely terrible against the run. They're giving up 166 and a half. I mean, it's hard to, this is like a Dalvin Cook play last week. I mean, just stick him in there, play him. I think if I'm going to try to fit him in all my lineups that I do. I mean, I think you got a solid floor, and I think it's got one of the best ceilings for a running back on this slate.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the rest of the team goes, number one, it's a team that wants to run.
Yeah.
So, there is some benefit. I know there's been at least one game where Trey Smith as his backup had a good showing. It was a blowout against Hawaii. I wouldn't write him off at 4,200 in tournaments because we're looking at the same situation here. At least I think Vegas has this at a 49.5 point total, 14.5 point spread. So UNLV only expected to score about 17 points, with Wyoming coming in at 32. It's a pretty good, healthy total for a team. And I like, Valadez. I can't push myself to Levi Williams. He showed in the first game that he has some rushing upside against Nevada, and has since then just completely just been a disaster. And then the top receivers look to be Adam Eberhardt and Gunnar Gentry. But man, even at somewhat low prices at 5K and 4,900, I'm just not going to be compelled to play a Wyoming receiver. This isn't a 3-game slate. But in the CSU game, which they lost, so I don't expect that to be the game script here. Aiden Eberhardt went 7 for 132. Not the worst, but just not something I'm really looking to do. UNLV side of the ball, we're going to have to actually get some clarification at some point. And man, I just have a feeling like this team isn't going to have a beat reporter who's super on it or going to be very revealing with this information. But on this slate a couple weeks ago when they played San Jose State, I won a decent amount of money on the late night slate because Max Gillum was like 65% owned and got pulled for, I think, Justin Rogers. And Justin Rogers looked better, but the stats weren't there. Gillum is interesting if he plays because he does possess some running upside, even though this Wyoming defense has typically been pretty solid. I don't know. I just feel like there's two plays that are somewhat safe on this team, and that is Charles Williams because he's going to get like 20-ish touches a game. But at 6,600, like you have to do something, and it's not promising when Tyler Goodson is 6,400 and in a much better matchup, in a much better game script, probably a much better player. And then Kyle Williams seemed to kind of break out last week. He's 5,200, was 4,200 last week, came through with 9 for 110 and 1. And more important thing is Justin Rogers was looking for him. And if Justin Rogers starts, I'm kind of feeling like Kyle Williams is in that clash conversation as well.
Yeah, that's the same thing I had. If he starts, I'm more interested in Williams. I mean, even kind of before that, I mean, last week he had, 9 for 110 and touchdown. He has been seeing targets this year, 5.2. I think there's probably worse you can do. I have a lot more interest if Rogers starts, though.
Yeah, man, at 4:00, are you going to know that?
No. Yeah.
So it's risky.
Yeah, I do think there's better options around that 5.2. You can, that's even going back. You can pay $200 more and get Badun up there. So, I think that's your safer play. I mean, it's obviously a tournament play only.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the game script much more favorable for Badun. They're expected to be trailing, so they're likely to be. And who does a team look at when they're playing from behind? It's usually that possession receiver, get those 7-yard chunks. So that 8 and 87, you can see how it could easily become, 9 for 90, 10 for 120, 12 for 140, and so on and so forth, and just make all your money living like that. All right, final game of the slate. Like we said, Southern Miss UAB canceled. We have a pretty interesting game with two teams that I don't really know what the hell to expect out of, to be quite honest with you. Stanford at Cal, 54-point total. So in college football, not the highest, but again, looking through this, yeah, you got a lot of team total, or you got a lot of totals in that 50 to 58 range. You only have 2 games over 60, so we could probably find something here. 2.5-point spread favoring Stanford, so it's expected that it's going to be kind of close. Both teams have not been good defensively at all, so you kind of start looking at the Stanford pricing. And as you're clicking through, you're like, Davis Mills feels kind of expensive at 7,800. Then you go to the running back position, and you're kind of like, Austin Jones feels kind of expensive at 7,000. And then you go to the wide receiver position, you're like, holy shit, these guys are all free.
Yeah, that is exactly what I had written down. I had Mills, might be a decent play, but not at 7.8. Austin Jones, I'm not too interested in paying that. And then they're just giving away the Stanford receivers, who each are seeing 7 targets a game. It's pretty spread out, but the most expensive one is Weddington at 5.1. I don't understand the pricing discrepancy between quarterback, running back, and then the wide receivers you have at the bottom there.
Yeah, and I mean, Stanford's a team that's long been known to value the tight end position, so it's not shocking that Weddington is where he's at. But just the first thing that whenever I do my projections, which took a little bit longer for RotoWire to get everything in there this week. I had some things that stood out. Jason Brownlee for Southern Miss, had he played, at his price, which I believe was under 4K had a 16-point total. I can't even actually tell you if he's healthy or not. So I mean, I could be completely off. You know, I'm just looking through some of these things, but as I was scrolling down, I only had four receivers over 20 fantasy points projected. Marlon Williams at 34.5, Jalen Robinson at 29.28, De'Ami Brown at 29.17, and Semi Fehoko at 21.7 fantasy points. I mean, look, they're throwing to him downfield. It hasn't clicked yet, but I am telling you that when it does, it's going to be a 30-point. I mean, this is going to be one of those old school J-Jaw games. And I remember the year that Ortega Whiteside. My apologies, because I know he's look. I don't blame him. I've got a tough last name too, and it irritates me when people pronounce it wrong. But you know, I think that I think back to when he was playing, and he'd just have these games where it was like 7 for 154 and 4. And I don't necessarily know that that's what's going to happen here, but man, like I just feel like there's just this bubbling that one of these guys, but specifically Fehoko, is just going to have an explosion game. To me, he's going to be a guy I'm probably going to play in cash just because it's a tight spread. I don't care that it says that Cal's fourth against the pass. It doesn't matter. They've played 2 games. One of them was against an Oregon State team that wants to run, including that game, Treston Gebbia. You know, he only wanted to run. And I'm trying to get – and they played UCLA, who has, you know, what's his I forget the Dorian Robinson Thompson or something like that. Dorian Thompson Robinson, DTR. And Demetric Felton. So all they're going to do is run. Okay, so they've played 2 teams who just want to run the football. So I'm not buying into that. You know, a good close game. I think that it makes a lot of sense from my perspective to use. And look, I don't hate you if you want to go with Weddington in cash. You know, 5,100 is not a bad price. I'm not. Oh, Fajoko's 4.8. Still, I feel the same way. Michael Wilson at 4.4, you know, he just had 6 for 95. These guys are totally in play in cash games. Look, we need some kind of relief, right? Like, we're not just going to go through this slate and just be able to play all the guys who project highest because they're fucking expensive for a reason. So,
yeah, I think I would agree with Fehoko and cash because, you know, you look back to last year, even he had 2 games with 2 touchdowns. So I think you're getting about the same floor as far as them 3 receivers. But I think the ceiling on him is just extremely higher than the other ones. I mean, he's already shown he can house 2 of them in one game. So,
and then you're also looking at it as a whole, just like, okay, who are the other receivers around this price range? And it's like Makai Polk, which maybe he could. Jake Tongues, I don't know, maybe he could. And we'll get to this in a second, but like Bryson Cannon, Queenan Williams, Aiden Eberhard, you're like, yikes, this is a little bit like I don't know territory. I just don't feel comfortable with any of these guys. And then on the Cal side of things, listen, from my professional experience, trying to trust anybody at the receiver position for Cal is just a big kick in the dick every fucking time. Just when you think you know that it's going to be, you know, Kekoa Crawford, it's going to be fucking Nico Remigio. And you're not playing him because you just keep looking at the box score from the last game and it completely changes. Now, I could be wrong. Things happen like that. But I personally just can't trust these Cal receivers. Now, we are looking at a situation where we don't know the status. We appear to have quite a few injury situations here or not playing situations that we have to be mindful of. And listen, in COVID 2020 era, these things are only going to become more and more, and they have been every week. You know, something happens that makes you just completely redo everything you've been working on. But, you know, Marcel Dancy at 5,100 in a pretty favorable matchup work on the ground, work in the passing game. Think you could do a lot worse than him. But something you were talking to me about, and I think it was like a cool thing that you brought up because I have a tendency to so often just look at what is happening this year. These are the things that happen. Well, asshole Nick, here's the problem with that. There have been 2 games. So if you're trying to draw conclusions based off of what happened, it's like this, and this happens with people all the time. There's one game or there's an injury, and immediately people just take to, oh, this guy threw the ball all the time to this person once the injury happened. Clearly, that's who he likes. And then the next week, that wasn't who he liked. Okay? That's not how it worked out. So it's really tough to make assumptions off of such a short sample size. And you reminded me that Chase Garbers had some games last year where he was getting it done on the ground. And while we haven't seen that this year, this is a Stanford team that's not a good defense. I could really see that coming together, and he's 6.3K.
Yeah, that's the thing that stuck out a lot. I mean, he's the cheapest playable quarterback on the slate. And he has the ups. I mean, he's had 27 points his last game out. He's had a few 30-point outings last year. I don't know. I think that's just that's huge upside for 6.3. And I don't even necessarily know if you have to pair him with any of his receivers because it seems like they spread it out a little bit. You easily could with Crawford. I mean, just looking at stuff this year, it does look like he's his number one option at 5.6. That's not much, but like you said, you have no idea what these Cal receivers are going to do. Tongs, I know they like to target him downfield. He's their tight end. He went 9 for 55 and a touchdown last week, but in the first game, I was trying to look, but he didn't see a target. But I do know from looking at stuff from him, they do like to use him as a deep field or downfield threat. But I think at 4.7, you're not stacking both of them. I think I can find the 4.6 or the 4.8 to go to Polk, who's also seen 5 targets a game.
Yeah, and I think I'm fine with either of those guys, and I'll have some exposure to Crawford because at 5.6K, if this is a competitive game, and I think I probably like the over on this. I don't do much of that, like trying to figure stuff like that out. I just kind of look at how I think the game is going to go aside from the score. But I don't want to miss out on a 5.6K receiver who could potentially be the highest scoring receiver on the slate. Right. And there's a world where he's the highest scoring receiver on the slate.
Mm-hmm. And I think that Dancy is fine at 5.1. I mean, the only other person he has in the backfield is Damian Moore. He did see 12 carries last week. First week he's seen 4. Doesn't look like they tried to run the ball at all the first game, but I think if he's easily 15 to 20 touches. I think you could do a lot worse from 5.1. And with a game total at 51, I think you could do a lot worse there. So yeah, I'm not running him probably out as in a running back spot. Flex spot, he's probably okay. Unless you just want to load up and go cheap at running back. Maybe you'd go up top and get one of those guys and pair them. I mean, you're getting volume, so you're getting probably 20 touches. He finds the end zone. You're sitting good there at 5.1.
Yeah, Dancy's touches looked way better than Moore's touches, right? Almost double the yardage. Yeah. And that first game, it was a negative game script the whole way through, and Chris Brown was playing. So, I mean, you had another running back in the situation there as well. Yeah, I mean, after going through this, I'm trying to look and just decide, who are my staples? Who are the guys I just feel like without question in terms of my main lineup, I just feel like I have to build around. And I think for me, the 4 guys who really pop off the page, and there is a 5th, and I just don't know how my build is going to come. And I don't ever try to do my quarterback like initially. I always end up, that's like the last decision I end up making, because I also don't often pair my receivers with my quarterbacks. But I think the 4 guys I feel best about this week in terms of my cash games, and I have like a 4A and a 4B, but it's Xavier Halliday, it's Tyler Goodson, it's Xavier Hutchinson. Wow, 2 Xaviers? There's one Zonovan. I forget, whatever. And then the 4A and 4B is Badoon and Fehoko. I don't have, my gut take is Fehoko. You're saving a little bit of money. For me, I think those guys are going to be, I may end up running with both of them. I don't really know yet. A lot of that's going to depend on how I end up building the rest of my lineup, because just looking through it and all cards on the table, I mean, I could potentially see myself going with Kobe Lewis as another piece in my lineup. I could, in my flex, and go 3 running backs and 2 quarterbacks. I could see myself going Austin Jones. I could see myself maybe, if Brown isn't playing, I could see myself potentially going down to Dancy. So I think the amount of money that I have left at the receiver position is going to dictate if I end up playing Fehoko or if I end up moving up. But really, honestly, if you're just like looking through it, I don't know where else I'm going to move up to. But those are my kind of like staples. Who do you think you have as yours right now?
Well, you had 3 of mine. I had Goodson at running back, I had Holiday at running back, and then Hutchinson at receiver. I'm kind of with you on the Fehoko and Badoon. As far as I would probably go with Badoon, but my 4th guy would be Book.
Yeah,
I just think I think that's way too cheap. Actually, at that price tag, I think he's probably going to be highly owned. He's got a solid floor. He can get there on the ground and through the air. I just think that's when you're building cash game lineups, and if you're considering not going up top, I think Book would be definitely somebody you want to consider in cash lineups.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I kind of differ in opinion with you. I don't think Book is going to be extremely highly owned, because I think people just view Notre Dame through the lens of a running football team. So we'll see. It's just going to be dependent on how much that top tier is used at the quarterback position, right? Like, if we're seeing Willis, if we think Willis is going to be highly owned, man, you just kind of feel like it's going to be really tough to see Book in there over Purdy, but maybe not. Maybe people are just like, Book is the lowest I'm going to go quarterback. Iowa State's a running team. I don't trust Chase Garbers. I definitely see that being a potential, but like, you sacrifice a lot spending up on quarterback. You really do.
Yeah, it's good. Once you see if them guys are going up top in cash games for quarterback, I guess that's kind of going to dictate his ownership, because making a cash lineup with one of those guys up top and then Book, I mean, that's a lot of salary since there's no value out here. I don't think you're going to see that kind of a build in cash, but no, it'll be interesting.
All right, well, that was a great first college football podcast. I'm really excited that we decided to do this week 12 instead of week 1, but it's just how it is, you know. We're kind of, more or less, I just wanted to test it and see if people have interest in it, right? Like, you know, I don't want to waste my time, waste your time, but I really felt like there was a lot of really, really, really good conversation in there. I think that you guys should be able to take a lot from this. I am Nick from CWE on Twitter. I very rarely go on Twitter except to try to win Millionaire Maker tickets from DraftKings, so I don't have to buy them. He is Snoopaloop_3. You can find us on Twitter at Eat the Chalk DFS, at DFS headquarters, where you can DM us. We're running a special right now, aren't we? Or am I not really
Yeah, we
saying that right?
got no, we got buy one get one. So buy a month for $19.99, and you get the second month free. So basically $10 a month. We also have another one going on. Go to our the podcast. If you send a screenshot of subscribing and screenshot of the review to either the Eat the Chalk DFS Twitter or the DFS headquarters one, we'll get you in our all our premium content for a week. So
Awesome.
nothing that's gonna take you more than 5 minutes, and you get a week's full of free content. And we're doing soccer, and we got everything going here. There's not many sports going on right now, but we tend to find enough stuff to play during the day. So come check us out.
We got Champions League soccer going on. We had some good results there. I won another $101 ticket. I'm up to 4 now, which is great for me because I'm never going to spend $101 on a contest unless my bankroll grows. I'm the type of person, I take money out. I don't let it sit in there. I'd rather have money and make my money grow in other ways than gambling it on daily fantasy. So you just got, that's the way. I don't see a scenario where I'm ever going to be a high dollar long-term player. I know what I'm willing to lose out of what I win, but other than that, that money's fucking coming home with daddy. You're not getting any of it back. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right, everybody, I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast. We will see you again next week.